On April 4, 2025, a missile strike shattered the city of Kryvyi Rih in central Ukraine, igniting a fierce propaganda battle that reached the United Nations Security Council 5 days later. In a tense briefing on April 9th, Russia's ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, stepped into the spotlight, delivering a detailed defense of the attack that starkly contradicted the scenes of devastation reported from the ground. His words aimed to reshape the narrative of a strike that has drawn global attention and a puzzling silence from some quarters.
The formal reason for the convening of today's meeting of the UN Security Council by the European supporters of the Kiev regime was the strike on one of the restaurants in Kryvyi Rih by the Russian Investigative Committee on April 4th.
Nebenzia portrayed the strike as a surgical operation, meticulously planned to dismantle a hidden military hub rather than a reckless assault on civilian life. He asserted that the target, a restaurant in Kryvyi Rih, was hosting a high-stakes meeting of Ukrainian commanders and NATO instructors, a claim that, if true, would expose deep Western involvement in the conflict. The operation, he argued, struck at the heart of Ukraine's war machine and its foreign allies.
According to the Russian Defense Ministry, as a result of a high-precision hit by a missile in high-explosive equipment at the venue of a meeting with commanders of formations and Western instructors, the enemy's losses amounted to up to 85 servicemen and officers of foreign states, as well as up to 20 vehicles.
For Russia, the strike was a justified act of war, a direct response to what it sees as NATO's escalating role on Ukrainian soil. Nebenzia underscored that Moscow has long warned of such retaliatory measures, framing the presence of Western military personnel as a provocation that demands a response. Yet the West, typically vocal in condemning Russian actions, has maintained an unusual silence on the alleged deaths of NATO officers, a reticence that some interpret as tacit confirmation of Russia's allegations.
We have repeatedly warned that concentrations of military personnel, as well as Western officers and instructors sent to help the Kiev regime, are a legitimate target for the Russian army.
Shifting the narrative further, Nebenzia pointed the finger at Ukraine's own defenses for the civilian bloodshed that followed the strike. He claimed that an errant Ukrainian air defense missile, not Russia's precision strike, crashed into a residential area near the restaurant, causing unintended casualties. This, he argued, was a tragic but predictable outcome of Kyiv's flawed military tactics, a point he pressed with evidence from the scene.
Unfortunately, due to the unprofessional actions of the Ukrainian air defense, a Ukrainian missile fired to intercept caused the death of civilians in the area adjacent to the restaurant. In any case, this is indicated by the characteristics of the striking elements recorded by eyewitnesses observed at the time of the death of people near the restaurant.
To bolster his case, Nebenzia turned to the digital battlefield, citing social media footage uploaded by Ukrainian users as proof of Russia's weapon choice. He argued that the thick smoke and dust captured on camera pointed to a high-explosive fragmentation warhead, not the cluster munitions Ukraine claims were used to inflict maximum civilian harm. This evidence, he said, dismantles Kyiv's accusations and exposes their narrative as a calculated lie.
And now the statements of the Kiev regime are refuted by footage from the scene made by Ukrainian users replicated on social networks. In particular, a large amount of smoke and dust is clearly visible on them, which unmistakably indicates the use of a high explosive fragmentation and not a cluster warhead.
Nebenzia went further, accusing Ukraine of deliberately placing military targets in civilian zones, a tactic he labeled as reckless and exploitative. By holding a summit in a densely populated area of Kryvyi Rih, he contended Kyiv's leadership knowingly put its own people at risk, using them as shields to deflect blame onto Russia. The West's silence on the NATO deaths, meanwhile, hangs over the debate, fueling speculation about the alliance's unacknowledged losses.
The very fact of holding a military meeting in one of the city's facilities in an area of dense residential development also testifies to the Kiev regime's disregard for the lives of Ukrainian civilians, which it uses as a human shield and cover for military activities.
In Ukraine, the strike on Kryvyi Rih, a city tied to President Volodymyr Zelensky's roots, unleashed a wave of anguish and outrage that painted a grimly different picture. Official reports tallied 20 deaths, among them 9 children caught in a playground's destruction and over 75 injuries as the missile's force ripped through apartment blocks. The contrast with Russia's account couldn't be sharper, as Kyiv framed the attack as a deliberate assault on innocents.
Staying silent about the fact that it is Russia killing children with ballistic missiles is wrong and dangerous. It only emboldens Moscow to continue the war and keep ignoring diplomacy. Weakness has never ended a war. That's why I'm thankful to every country whose representatives have spoken out, leaders, foreign ministers, embassies.
Back at the UNSC, Nebenzia stood firm, rejecting Ukraine's version as a propaganda ploy to mask military losses. He insisted Russia's strike achieved its goal, a success confirmed by both technical data and online evidence, while accusing Kyiv of exploiting civilian deaths for sympathy. The West's reticence on the NATO officer deaths only deepens the mystery, leaving questions of involvement unanswered.
Despite the fact that the achievement of the task set during the strike was confirmed both by means of objective control and by Ukrainian users on social networks, the Kiev regime immediately tried to shift the focus from sensitive military losses and accuse Russia of allegedly inflicting a targeted strike on the civilian population and civilian infrastructure of Ukraine.
The Kryvyi Rih strike has become a battleground of evidence and interpretation, with Russia's social media clips clashing against Ukraine's security footage. One side claims a military victory, the other a civilian atrocity. As the UNSC debates the truth, the West's unusual restraint on the NATO officer allegations suggests a deeper unease, perhaps a fear that confirming Russia's narrative could unravel the fragile facade of limited involvement in Ukraine's war.